appreciate it.
Yeah. So thanks. That was a great introduction. I think you stole my thunder a little bit. I think it's pretty easy to have great sources when you have the whole internet available to you. We're going to do a quick round of introductions, and then my goal is to make a panel interesting. Panels can be less interesting, but with this group of people, I don't think that's a big risk. My name's Bill Phelps. I've been a partner with Blu for about 2 years. Before that, I was an investor with Blu, but also ran the commercial business for Booz Allen Hamilton, predominantly focused on delivering cyber solutions to very large private sector organizations. Before that, I spent the bulk of my career with Accenture, and when I left, I was running Accenture Security, which was has been a tremendous success story over the last decade. So I think with that, maybe we'll just start at the end and work down. Roger, take it off.
Thanks, Bill. Hi, everybody. Roger Thornton. I'm a co-founder and general partner at a venture firm called Ballistic Ventures. As far as background goes, I was engineer in the Silicon Valley, worked on semiconductors, worked on operating systems and development tools at Apple. I was the guy on the engineering team that when somebody needed to go talk to marketing, they sent me. Some days I wish I'd never gone and I was still sitting there coding, and the stock would have been worth probably more than I have now. But I took a different route. Founded 2 cybersecurity companies. One was called Fortify Software. It was in the application security space. That was acquired by Hewlett Packard. And then I was part of the founding of a company called Alien Vault that was really a Spanish company we brought to the US, and it was a threat detection and response company acquired by AT&T. Spent a little time at AT&T where we built the cybersecurity business there, and then founded Ballistic, and just delighted to be here with y'all today and with this esteemed panel. Thank you.
Ben?
Hey everyone, I'm Ben Daniels. I'm a founder and partner at IBM Ventures. We're the corporate venture arm of IBM. We invest globally in AI, cybersecurity, cloud, dev tools, and quantum computing. My background is in M&A, so I spent a few years buying companies before getting to invest in them. Much prefer investing in them and building long-term relationships with founders like yourselves.
Hello, everyone. My name's Chris Ang. I work for Sands Capital here, based in Arlington, Virginia. We are focused on long-term growth investing across all stages, manage around $50 billion in total, and deploy that everywhere from early-stage venture capital all the way through large-cap public companies. And I work on our early-stage cyber investments.
I'm Seth Spergel, managing partner at Merlin Ventures. We are a seed-stage cyber fund, primarily focused on the Israeli market, which is where most of our team is. My own background, like Roger, started out on the technical side, so started at IBM as a developer. Also made the mistake of spending a few years in sales and sales management there, and then decided to get back to technology. Was VP of engineering at a public company, actually a toy company, so that was kind of fun. And then entered venture capital through InQtel. So if you're not familiar, it's a VC created by the CIA to basically help bring technology into the government. So spent about 5 years there, investing in companies like Cylance, Contrast Security, GitLab, a bunch of others. And then in 2018, got approached by my now partner, David, to come over and help start Merlin Ventures. And that's where we are today.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Blu is a great partner to a lot of other companies. I'm in a company with Seth, and I think that one of the things that has been key to our success has been just, as you can see here, the tremendous network that we have in the cyber community. So I'm going to kick off in I think an obvious place, but maybe with a less obvious question. It's easy for me, as now, like probably most of us, an active LLM user, to see how you can use an LLM to write a phishing lure, or to create misinformation. less obvious to me how you use, particularly an LLM, to, for instance, write detection logic in a SOC. So, really two questions, and I haven't planted these with individuals. I'll see who wants to raise their hand. But, at this point, is AI favoring the attacker or favoring the defender? And as investors, where would you not would you put the money on the attacker, but where are you seeing the near-term investment opportunities for AI in cyber? Not cyber to protect AI, but cyber to use AI. So,
I think technology has always, to some degree, favored the attacker, right? That's always been the challenge. They have to get through once, and the defenders have to be right every time. But, it's also solving some of the core problems that we've always had in cybersecurity, right? I don't think any of us have ever seen a pitch deck that doesn't cite one of the core problems of cyber as not enough people, not enough skilled people to deal with all the different problems we have. And what we're seeing is, now being able to use AI, not to necessarily, I know everybody talks about it's going to replace everyone, but to extend people, right? And to make one person who is very skilled capable of doing a lot of things that historically we just couldn't scale to, right? In fact, the company we're in together is doing exactly that, right? They've built a very strong technology platform, but they put people with it that can make that platform go a whole lot further. And so I do think that there's obviously a lot of good things happening on the defensive side as well that lets us get to a scale and cover a lot of things that we couldn't cover historically. But it's the arms race.
Interesting, a lot of the things I'm personally seeing from an AI standpoint follow the pattern that Seth's talking about of, I'll say, making people more productive, reducing the amount of work that some of our, rare skilled cyber people have to do. Are any of you seeing other applications, outside of the, what I'll call the, make people more efficient? What are some of the other AI applications that we're seeing from a defensive cyber standpoint?
I think one of the most interesting things that sometimes gets talked about less in sort of like the LLM wave is like the power of when you have these massive models of like the embedding space, or like embedding models, which is like these models are really good at like semantically learning at large scale things that are similar or dissimilar to another. And so, while like historically there were a lot of deep learning networks that could help you with anomaly detection, like being able to use these large language models and fine tune them and create an embedding model, basically think of it like I know what I want to semantically look like, certain pieces of malware or certain, phishing emails. There's a lot of ways where you can sort of use this really strong, much more complex similarity search now to really surface some pretty interesting things on the defensive side for cybersecurity. And we've seen a couple interesting startups doing that.
And maybe just to build on that, I think a lot of people view the probabilistic nature of LLMs as a bug. I think, at least in this context, it can be viewed as a feature. You can really replace a lot of intuitions with that probabilistic nature. It can see things like zero-day attacks that it might not have seen before. You might not have been able to build detection logic before because it has a reasoning capability. It has an understanding of what we would understand as humans when you would look at things. So I think a lot of people say, oh, it hallucinates, so it's inaccurate. I think some of that is a feature versus a bug.
I absolutely agree. I think that we've been conditioned for probably most of our lives or longer that machines are kind of binary. They're either right or wrong. And this notion that we have now of probabilistic or stochastic computers that are 90% right or right 90% of the time is very threatening to a lot of people. But I've seen multiple different examples of, where maybe it's coming up with an idea that it would never have come up with if it needed to be 100% correct. So anyway, Roger?
There are a couple of ideas around AI. So not surprisingly, I would say 80% of the companies that we see today have an AI element. And there's a couple of really important things to remember. Something created in this manner is still a program, but it's data that created the program. So the data scientists get the data together, they feed it in the correct way, and you create the program. And so when you're looking at something that's based on AI, it's gonna fall into a couple of categories. I'm using some existing AI system that was created by somebody else, maybe OpenAI and GPT, and I'm gonna use it to add efficiency. And that's great, but there's not gonna be a giant differentiator because everyone else is too. And there's gonna be some things you're gonna do with retrieval augmentation, some of these other techniques to make it a little bit more accurate, but it's not gonna, don't think you're gonna have a big differentiator there. When you move into, well, I'm going to, and don't forget, supervised machine learning, unsupervised machine learning are still techniques, and have been techniques used in cyber for more than 10 years. They're still relevant, but you need a data set. And so we're in this weird environment where some of the big players have the data sets and the startups don't. And so one of the things you gotta be very clever about is getting your hands on some proprietary, very unique, valuable data. And the best that I've been able to come up with is chances are very good your customers may have that data. And they're not gonna be, they're AI people if you're a big consumer packaged good company or be working on marketing stuff. And so you can come in as a cyber vendor and help that customer use their data to make themselves more secure. So now you're this agent of enablement for large customers. And then the big trick is trying to get them to cooperate and give some of that learning back to you so that you can do a better job. And that's gonna be very hard to navigate, but that's, if it's AI, where's the data? If it's data that everyone had, it's good, but it's not gonna be a huge differentiator for you.
Along those lines, I was talking to an executive at one of the very large banks earlier this week, and he did talk about the challenge with the team, but it was particularly getting the people in the SOC to be consistent, trying to raise everybody to the level of the best people. And to Roger's point, one of his suggestions was, and I don't know if his lawyers would go along with this, but get somebody to ingest the 15 years of SOC ticket information into a model and be able to come back with, we've seen that problem before, this was the best response, and we've seen that problem, and this was the best response, and these were the top 3 research approaches or analytical approaches. And I do think that while it's probably sitting in corporate servers, there is an unbelievable amount of data for organizations to mine to improve, security effectiveness. Okay. Maybe moving off of AI for a minute here.
Are we allowed to do that?
Are we allowed to talk about anything other than AI? You have to wonder. But I always tell people when I'm talking about what I do and where I focus that cybersecurity is an incredibly broad discipline. And when I think about AI, I'm like, the reality is AI is going to be part of every single discipline within cybersecurity. We're not going to have AI cyber tools. We're going to have cyber tools that use AI. But come back to my question, it does seem to some extent that one of the major themes over the last 5 or 6 years has been posture management. And, cloud security posture management, application security posture management, on and on. We've had tools that have emerged that it's been incredibly difficult to ensure that they don't drift. They're configured properly for maximum security. And I think there's a good argument that, one of the next big IPOs will be one of those companies, starts with a W. So what's the next theme? If we were sitting here, hopefully we will be sitting in some places beautiful in 3 or 4 years and speculating on the next big IPO, we could take a cop out and say, well, it'll be an AI company, but with the provision, everything's going to be AI. Anybody perspective on what's the next big thematic area within cyber?
I'll take a shot at it. By the way, posture management, posture management, it's hygiene. Hygiene's the most important thing there is, and so bravo, it's great. I think Seth had mentioned this. We're in security. The bad guy gets to go first. Why? Because if we tried to protect everything, we'd spend all the money in the world. So we got to kind of know what they're doing. And so if you look at where the bad guy's going in novel ways, one area that I find fascinating is shorthand is called deep fakes, but really it means the information presented to me, could be a phone call, a voice, a document, an image, has been manipulated and in such a way that my eyes, my brain, and my ears can't detect that it's real. And so I believe, based on what I've seen, both on the defensive side and the offensive side, we're going to probably within the next 5, 10 years be in an environment where if some information comes to you and it hasn't gone through a validator, you just aren't going to be able to utilize it for anything other than humor or comedy.
Yeah, to one of George Barnes' comments, I haven't seen a company explicitly started to do what you're talking about, but the concept of what's the provenance of this information, I just, in some ways, it harkens back to very old concepts of digital rights management. But somehow, I like the term validator, but how are we going to know that which is presented to us, use like authenticity, what's the provenance of it, is it legitimate, is it going to be multiple review steps, is it going to be some kind of embedded code that probably can be faked or whatever, but again, I think it's an enormous problem. But anyway, other comments on this, thematic question?
Yeah, I think, not to take us away from deepfakes, because we could talk about that probably for an hour, but I think really in application security, I think that's, in my opinion, the next big wave because of AI. Like we talk to startups every day. I think every single one of them has all of their employees using Cursor to do code gen. So there's going to be this explosion of AI-generated code that's already in production, and in the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to be 90, 95% of the code that's written is going to be either AI-assisted or completely AI-generated. So that poses a huge problem for security teams in that they don't actually have people that understand the code that's been written for them for their applications. So we've invested in a company around code quality to understand the quality of that code, but that's generated by machines. But I think that really is kind of the next frontier in terms of vulnerabilities that are going to be created is this AI-generated code, because what it's trained on is not necessarily secure.
Taking that to a next step that I'm sure people are already experimenting with, if not actually doing, is effectively, a supply chain attack on the code generator to, put, 0 days or whatever you want to call it into the code that's being generated, and our ability to find that. How are you going? If code has been generated and the machine generating the code has been compromised, I don't know how we find it.
Although I do think we actually have something of a leg up on that now over where we were a couple of years ago, because before, whether that code was written maliciously by a human or generated, we didn't have enough people to actually look at the code and say, there's a problem here, something's malicious.
Right.
In the scenario you're describing, okay, we've got GitLab Copilot generating the code, but I can have this other system over here that is totally separate at a scale now that it can look at all the code I'm deploying, right? And we've never been able to do that. So this is where I actually am less concerned about that problem going forward, because now we're finally getting to a place where the application security team can scale up with the application development team.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. I mean, if you think about going back, the rare organizations that wrote, like NASA is one of these that wrote some of the best code, they effectively did that with humans. Of one team wrote the code and a completely separate, isolated team did the code review.
How much did that slow them down, right?
And it slowed them down enormously, but it put people on the moon.
Right.
Safely. So, you know, I'll take the guy out. I hope you're right about the, you know, the machine that we don't necessarily trust can be validated by a separate machine that hopefully we trust more.
Or it doesn't, right, as long as we have different ones, right? And I don't know which one to trust.
As long as, yeah, I mean, if maybe you use 3 of them and they vote.
Yeah.
Back to the probabilistic.
Yeah.
I do want to say one thing about your posture management comment, right? I do think like that space as a whole, to some degree, disappears eventually, because what we're seeing now is all these new systems, whether it's cyber or really any platform, are becoming much more self-configuring and able to sort of see where they misconfigured. And so, like, one of the trends I've seen has been what I call sort of like correcting the past sins of cyber, where we've built these tools that have a lot of promise, but end up sitting on the shelf because we can never deploy them properly, we can never configure them properly. And now we're seeing a new breed of startups come out and say, I can just make this work, right? Just put it in, it'll learn from your environment, it'll figure out how to configure itself. And I think where that gets to is the posture management tools become a lot less important, because the tool can look at itself and say, I'm not doing this right.
I think that's it, and I know Ballistic has a company that does this in your portfolio. How is that going?
Well,
Not to
there's a couple companies that we have that are in there. One, we haven't announced the investment yet, and I think it's the one you're probably talking about. So probably the worst thing is my marketing people upset with me. But let's say in and around development, particularly in configuration and setting things up, there's a million ways to do things, because you want to support all sorts of different kinds of programs. And left to human curiosity, I spent probably more years managing development teams than anything in my life. Everybody wants to try something different, try something new. It creates this chaos. If you can hand that over to a machine that doesn't have an ego, that wants to learn the neat new thing, and you go back to the training data, though. The training data was from 15 years of clever programmers trying new things. It's just going to perpetuate that. So if you can kind of bring that down, yeah, I think you could really, you not only make things more predictably secure in the outset, but you've freed up a human being to go work on, let their creativity explore somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, and even in other contexts in security, but security is a good example. I mean, software is going to use software, and the software that we use as humans is probably going to be easier to use. And when you're talking about, we need to configure Splunk, or we need to configure SAP or whatever, we're going to be using some kind of AI that understands the 27 billion permutations of all of those different knobs and dials in the configuration, and set it up properly. And I agree with that. I just there's plenty of evidence that whatever we do to become more secure, somebody finds a way to exploit to make us less secure, and somebody will find a way to corrupt those systems that are doing that. But I do think that is very much likely to occur. But Chris, I don't think
Yeah, I mean, for like picking the next big company that starts with a W out there, I mean, one of the categories that I've always had an interest in. It's a huge category in terms of spend, kind of sleepy one, and there have been a lot of companies in the past that have gone after it. But I think as you sort of as I think about like how work has evolved, we're broadly more reliant on third parties, whether it's third-party code or software or tools, to like the SaaS applications you use. I mean, we were talking about this a little earlier. I mean, we've gone a lot from using applications on desktops to now on SaaS applications. I mean, my Okta page has like 20 or 30 different tools I have to log into at different times. And I just think this has been a consistent pain point and entry point of breaches at a lot of enterprises. Is your weakest link is a third party that you never heard about, or an HVAC company in the case of Target. And there's got to be a better way than questionnaires, right? The companies are spending billions on it. It's more of a compliance thing than it is a really secure thing. I don't know what the answer is. Otherwise, I'd try to maybe found it myself. But I just think that's an area that it's a big threat vector. There's a lot of spend, and it's honestly, I think, it's something that, in my view, CISOs, they are worried about it, but they're not sure what they can do about it, right? Because there's only so much you can do with a party that's not your own, an underlying party. So that's a category that I've been always sort of watching and hoping to find the next big thing. And
when you think about it, if you're an organization of any size, your data is spread across the internet. Your code is probably spread across the internet, and you're pulling it in at at runtime or from GitHub or whatever else. You are accessing systems that are spread across the internet through APIs. So this notion that I have an environment that supports my organization, that I'm responsible for keeping secure, is in many ways a fantasy. I mean, maybe there's a word for it, but I mean, you do not have a perimeter around the ecosystem of technology that's supporting your enterprise. And questionnaires are just, again, ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if it's possible to truly get an inventory of all of that. And if you did, it would be out of date. So I just think it's I don't have a,
I mean, I think it
I don't have a
pushes,
solution, but man, it's a huge problem.
As Seth might know, I think they did an investment in the space. I do think, like, if you continue to extrapolate out into the future, like, maybe like the future of EDR is something more like browser-based. If you're like if the browser is the main interface with which you're doing a lot of your day-to-day work, then maybe that means you need to have something, that's pulling or looking through data that's coming visually through the browser, because that's sort of where you have the best insight if you're continuously doing more and more work, not on your own machine, quote unquote, but on a third-party application.
I don't know if I'd run out and invest in it, but as I listen to that, I agree with what you guys are saying, but okay, how do you solve it? The thought that comes to mind is good old-fashioned red teaming will never go away in terms of, I've got a bad guy who's going to try to compromise this. It's insanely complicated. I'll never lock it down. Okay, well, what if I had my guys and gals trying to compromise it? And the fact is, there's billions of variations, but you got a kill chain, and there may be some spots in there where you say, okay, all these are going to land through here. And now you can circle back around to AI. If you can automate red teaming and it wasn't so expensive and I didn't need such resources.
I think AI-driven adversary simulation is absolutely going to be, I mean, I don't know that's going to be $1 billion company, but there's going to be some very, very successful, and I'm sure that some of the offensive security companies, Bishop Foxers and others, are already using AI to automate the red teaming.
And let's just get to the whole point of surveys and questionnaires being useless, right? All of those things, including the the point in time pen tests we do today are compliance, right? It's so that I can say to the PCI Association that I am following all your rules, don't find me, right? Very few of them are actually about security. And there's like that was an epiphany for me. I remember, having gone through SOX, having gone through PCI, and eventually realizing this is not security. This is keeping me from getting fined or sued.
Plausible deniability.
Yeah, and what AI lets us do now with things like the automated pen testing and red teaming and a lot of other capabilities is get to a more continuous security sort of thing where it now actually is keeping me safe over time, right? It's not just I look at this once a quarter, I'm good, nobody can yell at me.
Maybe to push back on something you said, Bill, on maybe that's not a billion-dollar company. I think the reason why those services companies weren't billion-dollar companies was they had to scale linearly headcount and clients, right? Like now, and this is a trend that we see across not just cyber, but across the entire industry is, services as software. Like you can have a tech-enabled or completely automated services business that has software-like margins and can scale revenue like a software business. So, continuous automated red teaming business could be a $10 billion business because they can scale now without having to scale their headcount.
Yeah, I mean, my personal probably, lanes that I spend more time in is managed security. And clearly we've seen with, I think Bob mentioned Huntress. I mean, we've seen in parts of that market exactly that happening. My offhand comment that I didn't give a lot of thought to about the red teaming was more thinking about the percentage of a budget that you might spend on that activity as opposed to the scalability. But I absolutely think you're right that business is going to scale like a software business. It's not going to scale like a services business. And I've fortunate to know some really, really good red teamers, and maybe at the very far margin, you'll still need humans because allegedly they can think about things that are more creative than the computer. We'll see, but it's going to be a far, far smaller number of people that we need doing that.
One thing that comes up in that conversation, sometimes people ask me, what's the difference between pen testing and red teaming? And I ask, well, what's the objective? If it's compliance, it's pen testing, and all that matters is getting the cost down so you can get the compliance. If you really want to try to figure out how someone else is going to break in, it's red teaming is going to spend a lot more money. Yeah. And it really is sad that those are two different activities because
it's a debate. One or two friends of mine here would remember this, but I know inside of Accenture we had a pen testing team and we bought a red teaming company, and there was an awful lot of chest pounding about the difference between those two disciplines.
Yeah.
Anyway, I will not because I want to plug one of the companies that we're invested in, but I think it's very relevant to this topic of the complexity. We're invested in a company, Gray Market Labs, but they create secure environments. And I think that we spent, as an industry, an awful lot of time trying to secure enterprises. And I think that one of the things that we'll see more of is scaling down and saying, we are going to do something that is sensitive and it has to be secure. And so the perimeter isn't going to be this building, it's going to be that table. And we're going to be pretty sure that we can secure that table, even though we can't secure the building and we can't secure the town. And I would expect to see more of that happening.
Well, if I could, so I'll throw out one more entry for what's that next big industry, because it builds on that. It builds on what you touched on with secure browsers, and it builds on Roger's point of the most valuable asset today is the data, right? And that's DLP, which is a term everybody hates today. But I think we're seeing that next generation of that start to evolve now, where the DLP can actually understand the data it's protecting. And as you start to push that down and it starts to follow the data around, that I can see being I mean, at the end of the day, everything we're doing is trying to protect the data.
Yeah, it's if you said the next big thing is data protection, it's like, well, the data protection has been a thing for a long time. But I completely agree, Seth, that I think that with AI and with other things that are emerging, I can easily see that some either amalgamation of existing approaches that works better or a new approach, but something that is able to, with an acceptable level of effort, really say, this is where all the data is in the organization. Here's who has rights to the different classes of data. And I mean, things like, you know, what's the source of one of the problems we have today? We never get rid of data.
Yep.
You know, so we'll automatically use an agent to delete everything based on our, you know, corporate data retention policy that nobody spends time on today because it's a waste of effort. Anyway, I can easily see a kind of I don't know if it's revolutionary or evolutionary, but it's something big in data protection being the next, you know, decacorn or whatever they call it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I don't know if this is the last question, but I want to make sure I fit it in, you know, before the end. It feels from a bunch of conversations I've had since the beginning of the year that things are opening up a little bit more this year. We saw the SailPoint IPO. There's some other companies that are probably in the pipeline. Talking to, you know, PE sponsors, there seems to be more willingness to transact, and maybe, I don't know if we're going to open the floodgates or just open the nozzle a little bit, but yeah, this is, what do you see in terms of exits this year?
I mean,
more, better?
I think, yeah, on the IPO side, I think a lot of people want to let a couple others go first and see how it goes.
Okay.
For us, I mean, so we focus on the Israeli market, and there, it's been a lot. I mean, obviously, like you've got the whizzes that are going that direction, but we see a lot of M&A. Like it's remained active. If anything, it's gotten more active over the last 2 years, and so I don't see that trend going away. I mean, most of the companies that we see are getting acquired in 3 to 4 years for, you know, maybe not $1 billion, but hundreds of millions.
Yeah.
And given that time frame, that's really great. So I think there's still going to be a lot more of that, at least for that market. But the IPO one, I think, it's probably still, like this year is a lot more testing the water before we really see everybody jumping in with both feet.
Yeah, and I think the question is the $1 billion exit going to come back? Like, is the larger M&A interest going to come back? I think, you know, we're starting to see more signs of that, but I think that's going to be completely dependent on the IPO market. So like once we see a few more companies go out, I think we'll get more appetite from the larger buyers to do bigger deals. But I think we're still in this we weren't in a barbell, but now we're probably going to be in a barbell.
I'm hearing more of a, you know, it's still more wait and see, but with a little bit more.
With a little
A
optimism.
little movement. Yeah.
A little bit more movement.
Yeah, a little optimism.
I think one of the challenges has been, like, I think cybersecurity has always been such an attractive area for venture capital because venture capital is effectively like the R&D budget for Paolo. And I mean, not in truth, but, you know, in practice, they do acquire a lot of new areas to offer to their, and new capabilities because the cyber industry is moving and evolving so quickly. You know, I think one of the challenges is there's been so much excess over the last 4 years that even if you have, you know, a really interesting company in a novel category, the challenge when it comes to exiting it is, well, you know, from a buyer's perspective, I have to pick 4 or 5 different ones. And so then it's a little bit of a matter of, you know, why you versus, I mean, it's so rare to find in cybersecurity, particularly at a given stage, say post-Series B, that you're the only one, you know, in the market doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so that is has been a challenge of how do you as a company become sort of the shiny object that everyone wants?
I'd like to throw out a couple concepts related to this. You know, we as investors need to make money for our LPs, and so exits are good for us. The founder, though, is where it starts, right? And one of the things that is really important for them to know, to not lie to themselves, is why are you doing this, right? And there's a lot of exit paths for a founder that aren't going to work with venture capital. For example, I could bootstrap something and get real cozy with a large company, and I can sell it for $20 million, and me and my friends share that. And that could be, if that's what you're looking for, go do it. I can build a company, and if you look at acquisitions, as Ben said, there's a period where they stop. A Cisco or Palo Alto Networks is rarely going to pay $1 billion plus for a company. They'll buy an established company, but not for a startup. So you might get to 500, 700, and you kind of got a cap. And then you push through that, and you may be private equity or public. And so it all starts with the founder and what they want to do. And one of the most beautiful emails I ever saw was during the craziness of the .com, and some of the old timers at Apple had gotten this email from Steve Jobs. And he was commenting on the insanity of, the gold rush. And he was like, do you guys remember, all we wanted was to build a company that we really wanted to work at. And if that's what your goal is, which I think is one of the most awesome goals, well then you want to go IPO, because anything short of that, you're selling it to other people. It's not your company anymore. IPO, you're beholden to a whole bunch of regulatory concerns, but it's still your company. And where I come back is, I'd also spent a little time at E-Trade, and I have a great affinity for the public market and what it represents to our economy. Anybody can go and invest in a company, and you save $100 a week in your job, you make the right investments, you can become wealthy. And so it's such a powerful engine. But right now, we have large acquirers, private equity, and man, just a little bit of it punches through to the public markets. I wish more of it did. I don't see any way to change that, but there are not enough public cyber companies. There should be a lot more.
I mean, one of the interesting things that I would note, and I guess I turn into a question, but since I really started focusing the majority of my time on cybersecurity about 16 years ago, I saw cycles of market leaders emerge and then be displaced. So, Fortify was a market leader, ArcSight was a market leader, Symantec was a market leader, RSA was a market leader. We could probably, extend that list. And I posited several years ago that if you were a market leader and you were displaced, you never came back.
What's interesting though, Bill, when you say that, Checkpoint was market leader and Fortinet was market leader, and they're still around.
They're still around.
They went IPO. Fortinet,
they went IPO.
ArcSight, they were acquired. And so if you want to be there for the long haul, you should press through to an IPO. And ultimately, if that's what the founders want to do.
And you should be in network security.
Yeah. I could probably
which is where some of the biggest companies are. But the question I was going to ask is, we seem to have, Zscaler appears to be very dominant in SASE in their sector. Palo seems to be very dominant. CrowdStrike seems to be very strong with some strong followers. If there was a place where I would maybe bet on some new leaders emerging, it would be in identity.
Yep.
With whether Okta gets knocked off or just becomes one of several market leaders. But I do think it'll be interesting to see whether, because there aren't very many public cyber companies.
Not enough.
I would make the argument that it's partly because it's just not a big enough market to support that many public companies. The analysis that would say, I won't go down that rat hole, but there are like structural reasons why a company has to be a certain size to really be successful long term in the public market. But I do share your view that it would be nice to have more. I'd love to see maybe some more segments emerge that have leaders, and I'd love to see some of the the really dominant companies have more competition. And I can imagine all those things happening. So Bets, do we see a new leader emerge in identity?
We call identity the gift that never stops giving.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean, identity is, you talked about there's no perimeter anymore. Identity is the perimeter, and so
Yeah.
it really has become the most important category in a lot of ways. And yeah, I think there's a lot more room for growth in there.
There's a lot more room. So we got a couple more minutes. Any last comments? Anybody? I tried to balance it up, but questions I didn't ask that I should have, or comments that people want to get out. Shout outs.
It's an exciting time, honestly. I think I do get the sense, we started with AI, so might as well end with AI. I just see a pace of just like novel ideas coming into the industry that maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, it was maybe a marginal improvement on an existing idea. There's like whole new categories emerging, and I think that from a venture perspective is really exciting right now.
I'm understand the sort of biological model of punctuated equilibrium around companies. We are in a period of just ridiculous new species emerging, new companies emerging, which typically results in a lot more money flowing into the market because everybody has to place bets. So I think it's lack of exits aside and things like that. I think we're just in an extraordinarily exciting time to be in technology and particularly to be in cyber.
And in a lot of ways, it's a restart for the entire market, right? Everything we've done in the past is now, we can re-examine it with generative AI and see how would we do this in a whole different way. And so, I know every few years all the cyber VCs say, is there anything else left to invest in? And now, I think there is, because everything.
I think they got the answer.
Yeah.
It's not similar probably functionally, but in terms of a wave, this is like probably the late aughts in terms of cloud.
Yep.
It became obvious that that with AWS and then others emerging, that was going to become the computing paradigm of the future, and it created billions and billions of dollars of opportunity, and that's the way I look at it. That it's not going to be the same, but that's the way I look at AI.
Yeah, and I think it's like the most exciting time to build a company because you can do it like way more efficiently now.
Oh God, yeah.
Than you could 10 years ago.
Yeah, cloud took away the cost of infrastructure. AI takes away the cost of people. Yeah. To a great extent, and that means it all comes down to the most creative, most insightful, most customer centric. But anyway, thank you, everybody. I think we achieved my goal of having a very, very interesting and dynamic panel discussion. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.